So today we're talking about 10 tips for nailing your MBA interview. Tip number 1, I think, is the most important one. It's what I call the kindergarten stuff. You may have heard the old saying, everything I needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten. This absolutely applies. Be polite, be nice. Understand, as someone who has conducted scores of interviews, both in academic and professional settings, people so often get the basic interpersonal stuff wrong. Shake hands, be polite to secretaries, be nice, avoid inappropriate topics, don't be too informal or glib. I've had people tell dirty jokes or tell me about how much they had to drink the night before. Don't do those things. Nail the simple stuff. And then afterwards, after your interview, a nice touch is to send a thank you email, or even better, a short handwritten note. These things seem like such small details and to many people quite obvious, but so many people miss them. Don't. Tip number 2 is do your research. Know a school's mission, strengths, values, their programs, and how you fit in with them. And have particular examples that you want to talk about. So if, for example, the school has a program that aligns with your professional interests or your past, let's say you're really interested in doing healthcare business and you want to do the healthcare club, talk about some of the things that that club has done and how they match up with what you hope to do or have done in the past. You know, having these really specific connections between your application strength and the strengths of the school will come across much better as you being really knowledgeable. So do your research. Actually sit down, go through the club's websites, the school's websites, read the materials, understand based on everything that you've learned from research how you fit in the school, and be ready to talk about that. Don't memorize your answers. Occasionally I will work with clients who will, because they're usually nervous, they'll want to memorize their answers and make sure that word for word they get it exactly how they want. Don't do that. There's a couple of reasons. One, unless you're a fantastic actor, in the actual moment, it will come across as stiff and stilted, and it will not be effective or conversational, and it won't make a connection with the person that you're actually talking to. Second, it introduces an element of nerves. If you know that you're going to sit down for a really important interview and you have to memorize your lines, again, unless you're a stage actor with experience, you're just adding unnecessary pressure to the process. And lastly, you actually want to make sure that you're in the interview. And if you have a canned answer, too often you'll want to force that into the situation where it doesn't fit. So don't memorize your answers. Actually answer the question that is asked. Now, in the last video, I talked about making sure that you don't memorize your answers. Kind of the cousin to that is don't show up with kind of these set answers that you're looking to give no matter what the person asks you. As someone who has interviewed other people, it can be incredibly annoying when someone tries to do the political pivot where you ask them a question and they say, that's really interesting, and they'll want to talk about something else. No, I want to talk about the thing that I'm asking you about. So be in the interview. And what I mean by that is actually really pay attention to the things that people are asking you so that you can give a response that is responsive to the actual question that they gave and not something that you really want to talk about. People who are experienced in interviews, people who do a lot of hiring, etc., they can tell when someone is pivoting or avoiding. Don't do that. It's incredibly annoying, and some people will view it even as disrespectful. 5, practice. Now, a lot of schools or companies will actually offer interview practice, and so if that's something that is offered, I would take advantage of that. If not, you can find books that have common interview questions that you'll get in MBA sessions. You can also talk to alumni or people you know who've gone through the process and get the questions that they've gotten. You can use resources like GMAT Club to find common interview questions. Give those to a friend or a parent. Record yourself answering those questions and use that to assess yourself. You'll oftentimes find that you'll have maybe some verbal tics like or things like that. You can just get rid of those once you notice them. It can be a little cringe sometimes to actually watch yourself in an interview, but it's part of the process. So practice so that when the day comes, you've gone through this so many times that it feels comfortable and relaxing and maybe even enjoyable. Have questions. At the end of almost every interview, there's going to be a moment where your interviewer will ask you, do you have any questions? What you certainly don't want to do or say is say, nope, that's it, I'm good. That shows that you're incurious, you haven't done your research, maybe you're already checked out. Have particular questions set. Now, I told you before, don't memorize your answers. This is maybe one that you can have a quasi-memorized set of answers to. You want to ask questions that are germane, right? Do some research. figure out what it is that I still need to know in order to make the decision. Right? So put yourself in the mindset, I'm trying to figure out if this school is the right one for me, and ask those questions that get to the bottom of it. If you show up without questions, again, you will seem incurious and unprepared. So have at least 3 questions in your chamber ready to go. So when they give you that prompt, you'll have a reply. 7, stay positive. Now, many people, interviews can be an incredibly nervous affair, and it can be hard for nerves to come through. But as much as possible, try to keep a positive mindset. This is an opportunity for you to learn, to show your best self, and so approach the interview with that in mind. If they ask you questions about your most difficult times, talk about those things with frankness, but try to keep a positive mindset so that you then can switch to explaining what happened, but then talk about some ways that you grew or improved or you sought solutions. Everything about your mindset and your affect should be positive and optimistic. People will mirror that, right? If you feel good and you express that you are feeling good, the other people around you will feel better about themselves too. It is a basic fact of human nature. So keep a positive, optimistic mindset throughout the interview. Now, in our last video, I talked about how important it was to stay positive. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of a caveat with that. No humble bragging. Again, as someone who has done interviews, one of the most annoying things is if you ask someone to describe a weakness and they give you something that's not really a weakness, like I care too much or I work too hard. Come on, man, don't do that. That shows a real lack of self-awareness and that you're just trying to game the system a little bit. And you're not a self-critical person if those are your answers. Like if I'm too awesome is your biggest weakness, come on, get out of here. Instead, identify a genuine weakness. But you can also pair that with talking about the steps that you have done, that you've taken to fix it. So for example, I remember an interview, someone told me they had a problem with deadlines. And so they said, look, it's something I'm always gonna struggle with in my life, but I've learned the Pomodoro method and I've gotten much better with it, but I know it's always gonna be a struggle. I appreciated the honesty of that answer. Problem, solution. Tip number 9. Curate your Zoom box. As more and more interviews go online, it's really important that you think about the backdrop that you use. A lot of people will sort of use those artificial filters. I actually like saying, hey, you know what? Unless my boat is a complete hovel and I can't go anywhere else, take a few moments to think about what you want to put behind you, right? In the same way that you would care about what you would wear as a suit or your hair or your glasses, your tie for a real interview, say, all right, I'm gonna figure out what I want on my bookshelf. Find some items that demonstrate a little bit of personality but are appropriate. Think about the books that are behind you and make sure, obviously, that it is a clean space, right? You don't want to have, dirty clothes and everything behind you. Take that seriously so that everything that's in the presentation behind you is interesting and might even provide an opportunity for someone to ask you about something in the background that could serve as an interesting on-ramp to a good conversation. Number 10, my last video I talked about curating your Zoom box, and this is a little bit kind of the cousin to that, which is that if the rules of your MBA interview allow it, and you are doing a Zoom interview, one of the things I like to do when I have any Zoom interaction is I use little note cards, paste them to the side of my screen. And they do a couple of things. One, I'll put little affirmations like stay positive, smile, relax, it's okay. Things like that when I read them will help me stay in the right frame of mind. Second, if there are people's names that I know, it's really important. You might get nervous and you might forget a name or something. Just write the names right there. And lastly, if there are particular things that you want to make sure that you bring up in the interview, then put those on there so that you can circle back at some point in the interview and touch on them to make sure that you hit all the highlights that you want to cover in your interview.